Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking time today to join us to learn more about the 2025 Jerome Hill Artist Fellowship. Today's information will be available in the fellowship guide, which you can download on our website. And we'll share a link for that in the chat as well. Feel free to follow along. This session will be recorded and posted to the Jerome Foundation's website if you want to visit that later. To ask questions, click the Q&A button in your menu bar and type in your questions. And you can click the live transcript option to have closed captioning. This is done by computer, so it won't be 100% accurate. A corrected closed caption will be there for the recording of this session, and that recording will be on our website on the events page. I'm Eleanor Savage. I'm the president and CEO of the Jerome Foundation. I am pronoun flexible, and I'm joining you from Minnesota Makoche, the homeland of the Dakota peoples. And I'm joined today by the fabulous Jerome team. Get over to you, TA.
Thanks, Eleanor. Hey, everyone. My name's TA, and I'm one of the program officers based in Minnesota at the Jerome Foundation, and I use she, her pronouns. Over to you, Melissa.
Hi, everybody. I'm Melissa Levin. I'm a program officer with Jerome Foundation. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm based out of New York City.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Marks. I'm a program officer located in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, and I use she, her pronouns.
Hi, I'm Andrea Brown. I'm the Finance and Operations Manager. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm in the Minnesota office of Jerome.
I'm Felix Foster, he, him, Grants and Programs Administrator, and I'm also based out of Minnesota.
So for today's agenda, we have about 90 minutes together. We'll spend most of our time introducing the fellowship, talking through the eligibility requirements and the application and review process. We will also discuss the review criteria, share resources for application support, and talk about the purpose of fellowship funds and program requirements, along with some information about us, the Jerome Foundation, and our values. We'll save the last part of our time together in Q&A to address your questions, so definitely don't be shy in putting your question in the chat when that time comes. Here's a link to the fellowship guide if you want to follow along, which Felix will kindly drop into the chat.
And Felix, do you want to share with us about accessibility?
Did the link come through?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So the Jerome Foundation is committed to making this application process accessible. Webinar recordings will be fully captioned, and a PDF version of the presentations will be made available. The only platform for applications is Submittable, which has attained a voluntary product accessibility template, or VPAT, affirming that this platform is accessible to a wide range of submitters with disabilities and follows industry standards outlined in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0. Applicants without online access or with access requests should contact Andrea regarding alternative options by April 1st. The Jerome Foundation was founded by artist and philanthropist Jerome Hill in 1964. It honors his legacy by supporting early career artists and arts organizations, offering programs, services, and activities in Minnesota, where Jerome Hill was born, and New York City, where he spent most of his creative life. Our core values are equity, centered around intersectional racial equity, diversity, innovation and creative risk-taking, and humility. The fellowship guide includes our definitions for these values. I would encourage you to review that, as our core values tie directly into the review criteria and our goals for this program.
This fellowship supports early career Minnesota and New York City-based generative artists. We'll go into more detail on what exactly this means when we discuss eligibility requirements. Supported artists are those who take creative risks in exploring, expanding, imagining, or reimagining creative practices and experiences, reclaiming or reviving traditional forms in original ways, and or questioning, challenging, or disrupting cultural norms. We seek to support artists who are creating, developing, and presenting imaginative work that is deeply considered, presented with technical skill, is compelling, and offers a distinctive vision and authentic voice. Our intention is to support artists who embrace their role as part of a larger community of artists and citizens, and who consciously work with a sense of service and responsibility. The application is now open, and the deadline is Monday, April 15th by 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. You'll be notified about your application status by January 31st, 2025. Fellows will receive $60,000 over 3 consecutive years. That's $20,000 each year in 2025, 26, and 27 to support their time and expenses for the creation of new work, artistic development, and/or professional artistic career development. We expect to award 45 fellowships across the 7 artistic fields you see on the screen here. And within each field, the foundation embraces and applauds interdisciplinarity and experimentation and supports a wide range of aesthetics, forms, creative practices, artistic lineages, and points of view. The application provides space for artists to share in their own words how they describe and view their own work and their goals in creating it. In selecting a field in which to apply, artists who identify with more than one field are encouraged to consider their artistic lineages, presentation contexts and experience, the work samples they plan to submit, and which group of reviewers will be most knowledgeable about their work.
Jerome Hill Artist Fellowships support a diverse range of early career generative artists, including but not limited to those of diverse cultures, races, ethnicities, genders, gender expressions, sexual identities, class, physical and mental abilities, generations, religions, countries of origin, languages, and immigration statuses. In 2023, the last round of the fellowship, 702 artists and collaborative teams applied for 54 fellowships. Of the selected fellows, 48% were based in Minnesota, 52% were based in New York City. 82% of the fellows identified as Black, Latinx, Asian, Native American, Middle Eastern, and multiracial, as detailed in this chart on the slide. 45% identified as female, 15% as male, and 36% as gender fluid or nonconforming. 54% identified as queer, gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, or same-gender loving. 14% identified as transgender. 25% are part of the disability community, and generations represented include millennials, Gen X, and boomers.
Please see the listing of Jerome Hill Artist Fellows on our website to get a sense of who has been funded by this grant program. The Jerome Hill Artist Fellowship is offered in alternating years. After this current cycle, which is for 2025 through 2027, the next application will open in 2026 with awards announced in 2027. You will be required to respond to an eligibility questionnaire and submittable to access the field-specific application. The purpose of this eligibility determination is to avoid having ineligible artists spend time applying. After you've completed the questionnaire, you can also set up a phone appointment with Jerome staff if you have specific questions about your eligibility. It is important to note that artists may only submit one application, either the individual application or the collaborative application, but not both. Applications must be submitted by the applicant artist or artists and may not be submitted by an organization or other entity, such as a nonprofit, a producer, an agent, or multi-owner LLC, or a management company, among others, on the applicant's behalf. Fellowships are awarded to artists, not organizations. Funds are issued directly to the applicant or applicants as named in the application or to their single-member LLC, if applicable. Payments cannot be made to a fiscal sponsor, management companies or producers, multi-owned LLCs, S-corps, consultants, or 501c3 organizations.
We are now going to spend some time talking about what makes an artist eligible to apply for this program. Eligible artists are residents of either the state of Minnesota or the 5 boroughs of New York City who have been residents for at least 1 year at the time of application, Eligible artists are generative artists who are currently creating new original work, such as choreographers, composers, playwrights and devisers, filmmakers, poets, writers of fiction or creative nonfiction, and visual artists. Eligible artists are those who are creating new original work. That means work that is created and developed by the artist from concept to completion, and not work that is a remount, revival, or interpretation of previously existing material. Eligible artists are early career artists with at least 2 years, but not more than 10 years of professional generative artistic practice in any field. An eligible artist's CV should reflect no more than 10 years of credits for creating and presenting their own new original work. For this application cycle, that means an artist should not have credits for awards or public presentations of work dating earlier than 2014. Likewise, eligible artists should have no less than 2 years of credits for creating and presenting their own new original work, meaning that you must have credits dating back to at least 2022. The 2 to 10 years of generative creative practice does exclude any time spent in a degree granting program, if applicable. And artists whose generative artistic careers began in 2013 or before, but who took an extended break of 2 years or longer from creating and presenting new work due to enrollment in a degree program, or for personal reasons, are required to confirm eligibility with Jerome staff via a phone appointment before applying.
We also want to talk specifically about what makes an artist ineligible for this fellowship. Artists who are beyond 10 years of generative practice, even if they have not yet received significant artistic recognition, such as in the forms of awards and prizes, are not eligible to apply. Jerome does not fund interpretive artists who have solely performed in or produced the work of others, such as dancers, musicians, actors, editors, designers, journalists, among others. For more information on this, a field-specific list of roles is available in the fellowship guide. Artists who have received significant artistic recognition in the form of awards and prizes, and production, presentation, publication, or distribution, even if they are within a 10-year timeframe of generative practice, may be too established to be considered early career, and therefore not eligible to apply. The fellowship guide has field-specific information related to this. Mid-career or established artists who are transitioning from one field to another will also not be considered early career in their new field of activity. For example, a composer with a substantial career in music who is now moving into choreography, or a playwright with a substantial career in theater who is now moving into writing poetry will not be considered early career for the purposes of this fellowship. Students enrolled full-time in a degree granting education program at the time of application or during the fellowship period are not eligible. The Jerome Foundation defines full-time student in terms of enrollment or matriculation status, not contact hours. So full-time students, as well as low residency MFA or PhD candidates, including those who are all but dissertation, are not eligible to apply. Further, tenured faculty members or the equivalent are not eligible, and applicants on more than one application are not eligible. And lastly, previous recipients of a Jerome Hill Artist Fellowship are not eligible.
Age and formal training in a degree program are not factors in determining eligibility.
Ongoing collaborators may submit a single application requesting support for 2 artists who will share the fellowship funds equally. Artists applying collaboratively as co-applicants must meet all of the fellowship eligibility requirements, both individually and collaboratively, and have a demonstrated history of creating new work together and an ongoing commitment to working together throughout the fellowship period. You may not also submit an individual application as an individual artist along with a collaborative. It's one or the other.
We'll next go over the steps to apply in the application and review the timeline. We recommend that you read the fellowship guide to get specific information related to your artistic field. After you have selected the artistic field to apply in, you'll go to Submittable and first complete the eligibility questionnaire before completing the online application.
So applications are now open, and between now and the deadline, you can attend information sessions, webinars, and Q&A sessions, and set up individual phone appointments with Jerome staff. The application deadline is Wednesday, April 15th by 4 p.m. Central or 5 p.m. Eastern. Late applications will not be accepted, and incomplete applications will not be considered. Once applications are submitted, they may not be edited or updated. Between May and November, staff will review applications for eligibility, and panelists will review applications. You will be notified no later than November 21st if you're moving to the finalist stage. Panelists will then have their panel meetings and provide recommendations to the Jerome Foundation's board. After the board has approved all fellows, all finalists will be notified of their status no later than January 31st, 2025.
We will go into more depth about the application at our upcoming info session on Monday, January 29th at 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Eastern, and you can register for that info session on our website, or you can watch the recording later. Briefly though, the application includes 3 primary elements. The first is work samples, which are field specific. Generally speaking, work samples should represent 3 works, projects, or bodies of work. And the application additionally asks for descriptions and contextual information about your work samples. It is important to note that if you are applying as an individual, your work samples must be for works for which you alone are the generative artist, meaning that you have created the work from concept to presentation. If you are applying with a collaborator, the work samples must be work that the 2 of you, and only the 2 of you, have created together. Next, you will provide a detailed artist CV. Please note that this is not a one-page resume, but rather a comprehensive listing of your generative work, complete with dates and other relevant information. The application guide PDF includes more detailed and field-specific information related to the work samples and artist CV. There will also be pre-recorded topic-specific work sample and CV webinars with information on selecting work samples and structuring your artist CV, and these will be posted to our website by January 29th. Lastly, the application also asks a set of core questions that directly connect to the criteria panelists will use in their application review. You can elect to respond to the core questions via text or video, and there are recommended minimum and maximum response lengths. Please note that you are not asked to provide budgets or specific fellowship plans in your application.
The review process begins after the application deadline. First, Jerome staff reviews applications to confirm they are eligible before they are sent to panelists. Eligible applications are reviewed by a diverse panel comprised of arts professionals and artists with the experience and understanding of early career artists in Minnesota and New York City. Panelists have a breadth of knowledge encompassing interdisciplinarity and experimentation within and across fields, and a multiplicity of aesthetics, methodologies, practices, and ways of creating and presenting in various genres, forms, and styles. You can see a list of past panelists on our website. Applications are assessed on the review criteria, which we will present in detail in a moment. A group of finalist applications is determined, at which point Jerome staff will reconfirm eligibility. Panelists are charged with considering the strength of the application in addressing the review criteria and of recommending a cohort of fellows that collectively captures the energy and diversity of the arts field through an intersectional racial equity lens. These recommendations are sent to the Board of Directors of the Jerome Foundation for final approval.
In the spirit of transparency, we provide the review criteria and definitions to applicants as well as panelists. So you are working with the same set of information. The panel assesses the criteria based on the applicant's work samples, responses to the core questions, as well as the work history on their CV. So all of that application information. Panelists are asked to honor the information provided by artist. The panel will also consider the alignment among the application elements. For example, whether the work samples and CV reflect the information shared in the core question responses, and vice versa. The 3 review criteria are creative risk, creative vision, and creative engagement and impact.
The first criterion is creative risk. Inspired by the Foundation's core values of innovation and risk, this fellowship supports artists engage in creative risk-taking, whose work is exploring, expanding, questioning, experimenting with, or reimagining artistic forms, practices, and/or approaches to creating original artistic work. This includes artists who are reclaiming or reviving traditional forms in original ways, and/or questioning or challenging the status quo in their field. This criterion is about the artist's intentions in their work. To assess the criterion, the panel will review the work samples and the responses to the core question. What creative risks are you taking? And/or what are you engaging, questioning, challenging, reclaiming, reviving, and/or reimagining?
The next criterion is creative vision. The fellowship supports artists who are creating, developing, and presenting imaginative work that is deeply considered, presented with technical skill, is compelling, and offers distinctive vision and authentic voice. This refers primarily to the experience of the work. Panelists are asked to consider who an artist is, the context of their work, what makes this an especially opportune time for a 3-year fellowship, and if they are self-aware about the strengths and opportunities related to their artistic development. This criterion is both about what the artist has achieved in their creative explorations and what they seek to understand. To assess this criterion, panelists will look at your responses to 3 core questions. First, what are the key questions you hope to explore through or about your work during the fellowship? What subject areas, thematic focuses, social concerns, or aesthetic styles, forms, or practices are you working with? Second, what is your artistic lineage? Who are the other artists, arts leaders, or organizations, and/or forms of work that have influenced your work and on which you're building? And how does the content of your work connect to your identity and history? And lastly, what are you discovering in your work? What are your strengths? What are the areas you wish to devote more time and attention to move your work forward? Are you looking to expand or learn new technical skills, research or engage with new ways of practicing your work, explore new aesthetic styles, or develop your creative content? What makes this an especially opportune time for you for a 3-year fellowship?
And last but not least, the third criterion is creative engagement and impact. Inspired by the Foundation's value of humility, this fellowship supports artists who embrace their roles as part of a larger community of artists and citizens, and who consciously work with a sense of purpose and responsibility. This fellowship supports artists who have clarity around both their creative goals and the strengths and opportunities that drive their explorations. This criterion is about connection, engagement, and the impact of the artist on their field and/or creative community, as well as the potential impact of the fellowship on the artist. Panelists will look at the CV and the responses to 2 core questions for this criterion. Who are the specific social or artistic communities, participants, and audiences you seek to engage, inspire, and impact through your work? And what is your current relationship with or connection to these communities? What is the desired impact? And what are your strategies for fostering meaningful connections? And what are your goals for this fellowship? And what impact do you hope the fellowship will have on you and your work?
Before we get to your questions today, we do want to briefly touch upon information that will be relevant if you receive the fellowship. The fellowship funds, which is $60,000 total, which is $20,000 per year for 3 years, can be used for costs relating to 3 primary purposes. First is the creation and presentation of new work, which is the time and any expenses a fellow incurs conceiving, creating, and presenting new work. Fellows are encouraged to use the funds to support and assign value to the time they spend making work, and can also use funds to cover other expenses listed on the screen here. The second is artistic development funds, which are designed to support time and expenses for skill development, research, and/or investigation into new areas that may or may not ultimately find expression in new work. Lastly, professional creative development funds, which are designed to support fellows' time and expenses to refine artistic business skills, including marketing, administrative and financial, legal, archiving and documentation, social media, promotional website development, among others. Funds may also be used to hire support in these areas in service of the fellow's long-term career goals or to expand the fellow's professional networks and opportunities.
A requirement of the fellowship is attending a one-day fellowship orientation where we will review the logistics of the program, including how to create fellowship plans and budgets, and introduce the cohort to each other and to the Jerome Foundation staff. Please save these dates on your calendar. The orientation is the only time-specified requirement of the fellowship. Fellows will also have access free of charge as part of the fellowship to financial workshops and participation in MAP Fund's SPA coaching program. SPA is a 12-month program where fellows have access to one-on-one coaching sessions and peer artist gatherings. Participants receive holistic, artist-centered, compassionate support to grow their sense of agency in their artistic careers and to deepen their sense of connection and belonging. We mentioned earlier that you do not need to submit a budget or fellowship plan in the application. We do ask fellows to develop a plan and budget after attending the orientation and before beginning fellowship activities. During the course of the fellowship, there will be annual check-ins with Jerome program staff with an invitation to share learnings, experiences, and suggestions. And fellows will be asked to reaffirm their eligibility annually before receiving fellowship funds. Fellowship funds are available beginning in May 2025, and fellows will receive $20,000 per year in 2025, 26, and 27.
We want to let you know about some upcoming virtual events. You can also find this information on our website on the events page. On Monday, January 29th, starting at 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Eastern, as mentioned, we will host an info session focusing on an overview of the application. You can register for that on our website. On Monday, March 11th at 11 a.m. Central, 12 noon Eastern, and Wednesday, April 3rd at 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Eastern, we will host a live fellowship Q&A session. These are open office hours where you can bring your questions and listen to other applicants' questions. These live sessions will not be recorded. We do have 2 pre-recorded sessions that will be available on our website by January 29th. These cover best practices for submitting an artist's CV and work samples. Both specific to this fellowship, but they also include tips and insights that may help you in other applications for other grant opportunities. All recorded sessions will be available on our website's events page.
Finally, we want to let you know how you can reach us throughout this process. If you have questions about your eligibility or general questions about the program, we encourage you to make a phone call appointment with program staff. You can also send your questions by email. Our email addresses are listed in the fellowship guide and on our website.
Okay, so remember, fellowship applications are due Monday, April 15th, 2024, before 4 p.m. Central or 5 p.m. Eastern. So you can submit anytime between now and 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern on April 15th. And we want to emphasize this is not midnight. And why? Because no one's here at midnight to answer your questions or help you if you're having any technical difficulties submitting your application. Once applications are submitted, they may not be edited or updated, and late applications will not be accepted, and incomplete applications will not be considered. All right, I'll turn it over to Andrea.
Yeah, and just to note, our application deadline is tax day, so hopefully it's a deadline you already have in your head, and do your application before you do your taxes or vice versa, whatever works for you. So we are welcoming any questions you might have. You can enter them either just in the chat or through clicking on Q&A. And when you do click on Q&A, you have the option to ask your question anonymously, but note that we won't, attribute a name to you as we're reading them aloud. I'm not currently seeing anything in the queue, but I'll use this as a chance to remind folks that if you do have a question that you feel like might be, really specific to you and your eligibility, or where you might consider submitting an application and in what field, that's what we're here to support and help with. And so we would encourage you to set up that phone call appointment with Jerome staff to walk through that. So I am going to start asking these questions aloud and invite my colleagues here to respond. So one person has a question: if we started school like a BFA in 2013, does that count as the beginning of our generative work?
I would say that we don't count your time in a degree program as part of the kind of start of the generative clock. So it's after you are out of your education, if you choose to do that, and you need at least a couple of years of experience developing and creating, presenting your own original work post a graduation program in order to be eligible to apply. And I would invite my colleagues, if you have anything else to add, please feel free.
I do have another question that is also related to some timeline. So if we graduated in December 2022, would we qualify for this fellowship?
So if you have you need at least 2 years of experience post-graduation, or sometimes people go back to school, after they've already started their creative practice, and you may have work that you have generated and created prior to a degree. So there's a little nuance to that. Melissa, you look like you were about to say something. Did you want to share anything?
I think I just was going to say exactly what you said.
Okay.
And here's another kind of twist on the timeline question. Does taking time off of creation due to the pandemic count in that 10-year period?
Yes, it needs to be a significant block of time. So not just a couple of months here, a couple of months there. If you took off a solid 2-year block of time because you needed to, focus on other things, or you were in a degree program, or you were doing some kind of support for your family, we would consider that, and we encourage you to set up a call or an appointment with staff to discuss.
Are international artists eligible to apply for this fellowship?
I can start us off with that answer if that's helpful. So the requirement, the geographic eligibility requirement is where you currently reside. And so that has to be in the state of Minnesota or in the 5 boroughs of New York City. And you have to have been residing there for the past year at least. It has to be, for example, where you file your taxes. But if you are international and now currently based in these locations, I think maybe Andrea or Eleanor, you can add some nuance to other requirements, then you could be eligible to apply if you meet all the other eligibility requirements.
Yeah, exactly. You just need a tax ID number or a social security number. And then you would have been, kind of physically in residence for the majority of the year. So if you have, engagements that might take you out of state for part of the year, we just ask that you have the majority of the year in residence.
I'll also just add that we do have an FAQ page on our website as part of the Artist Fellowship information, and we do go into some more of those details about residency requirement on that page, and I can drop that into the chat as well.
And I'm going to lift a couple questions out of the chat and into the Q&A. So this may be a question for the application webinar, but could you talk about fields and interdisciplinary artists? Like if one is a visual artist and a writer, for example?
Melissa, do you want to take that?
Sure, I can start us off. Yeah, the foundation broadly embraces and applauds interdisciplinarity, and we know that artists are working across a range of artistic fields. For this application, you do have to choose one field in which to apply, and we do try to give some guidance around that, thinking about your artistic lineages, thinking about the work samples you might consider submitting, and also recognizing that we do bring in reviewers who have a really broad range of knowledge and also just an expansive way of thinking about artistic fields and genres. Ultimately, if you do have more specific questions, again, you're welcome to set up a phone appointment with staff to help talk you through that. But we hope that some of these parameters around artistic lineages, where and how you typically present your work, what your work samples will be, and who the reviewers best informed to review your work will be.
And sort of riding alongside that, we did have a question of, could you just spend a moment sort of defining what we mean when we say artistic lineages and perhaps some examples?
Sure. I mean, we are really expansive, I think, in thinking about this, but it's really anyone, any person, any entity, be it, you know, familial or artistic, that has an influence on your practice, and where you think about the lineages of your practice, where your ideas and explorations may originate from. So this is really an open-ended question where you have the opportunity to tell us about the primary influences on your work and how that's brought you to the work that you're making today. I'll open to other colleagues if you want to jump in with other notes.
I would just say that, you know, a lot of your responses to the core questions allow the panelists to get to know you and maybe give some texture and richness to what they're experiencing in the work samples you provide. And so, you know, those things are kind of tied together. If you're talking about lineage and influence, that might indicate something to the panelists to sort of pay attention to when they're watching or experiencing your work, knowing that it's kind of done in these work sample clips that aren't like the full, they're not experiencing the, you know, full work of your artistic career, but just to give them some insights and things to think about as they're experiencing your work.
And I'll just add one other thing, that these are really not meant to be prescriptive. We are not looking for one specific kind of answer, and also understand in the expansiveness around interdisciplinarity, that arts and artists intersect with so many other fields, you know, the sciences, history, and if there are entities or people, you know, who have influenced your art making, who expand into any other field, we also really welcome an expansiveness around that lineage as well.
I'm going to bring in another question from the chat. As a dancer, does generative work need to be evening length works, or can it be shorter to be considered?
It can be shorter to be considered. Length isn't really the defining factor of generative. It's more about, is it your own original work that you've created from start to finish?
Kind of a related question. How is professional generative artist practice defined. For example, if one does a non-competitive artist residency during a particular year, but doesn't generate any work that year, does that count as 1 year of generative practice towards that 2 to 10 year limit?
Oh, this is a very nuanced question, but I would say any time that you are devoting to your creative practice, whether you're working on a specific project or are developing your skills and kind of depth of understanding within different forms towards creating your own original work would count.
And another question about what constitutes 2 years of generative professional work. Does any original work qualify regardless of its quote unquote success?
Anyone want to take that? I can jump in to get us started. I don't even know how to define success. But so yes, it is whatever work you are creating and however you are sharing that or manifesting it, with your community is, your professional generative work. And I think that's what I have to say for that. Anyone else want to add on?
In terms of specifics about what the quote unquote successes are, we do have quite a few examples of awards and recognitions that are field specific in the fellowship guide to look through, and it kind of lists like you've won an Oscar for films and things like that.
And those are more about kind of what would move you out of eligibility. So we don't have any specific requirements of things that you have to have received in order to be eligible.
Also, if I'm a Minnesota or New York City resident, does my collaborator also have to be a resident of one of these places?
That's an easy one I could do. Yeah, it's a beauty. Yes. So yeah, both the collaborators on the application need to fulfill individually all of the eligibility requirements. So I guess that's the rule of thumb. So yes, you have to be a resident of either of those geographic areas.
And we have had folks in the past who have been collaborator duos with, both people residing in New York City, both people residing in Minnesota. And we've even had a case of one person based in Minnesota and one person based in New York City applying together as a collaborative. So that's how we define that. This person has an application question regarding visual arts, where they are wanting to combine video and images. So it says that 10 images or 4 minutes of video are acceptable. So for example, if I were to submit 2 videos, would that mean I could submit 8 images as well? And if I have a video that is 9 minutes, could I share it in 2 parts? And I'll just say that, we don't want you to have to do too much math when you're doing your application and your work samples. So, I would recommend you taking a look at the application guide. That's going to have more specific requirements around if you are in visual arts and you are doing a combination of text and images, kind of how you want to share those out. And if you have something in mind and maybe a more specific question to you, that would be a great email to send to one of our folks on the program team.
I will comment on if you have a video that's 9 minutes, could you share it in 2 parts? And the answer to that is no, because you need at least 3 work samples. 2 of those, there's specific information that you'll find in the application and the application guide about that. But you'll you need more, you need at least 3 samples. So if you do 1 video, that would only leave you with 2 samples.
And I'll just add on to that, it's also a requirement is that you can only submit 1 sequence from a work. So if you do want to submit a video, you would select cue points of up to 4 minutes, for example, for that work. And that would be the only sequence that panelists' attention would be directed to. However, in our work sample instructions, we guide everyone to submit full-length videos, and panelists optionally can go backwards or forwards to view other elements or sequences in the work should they so choose.
If we do theater and film, can we apply for both, or do we have to choose one?
Ideally, we would love if you could pick one, just pick the discipline that you feel like you're most, that you feel like you have the most strong work in. And I think it was mentioned in the presentation, like consider your panelists and their knowledge base too, as to which one would be a stronger application. And I invite more nuanced answer from my colleagues too. But yes, we want you to pick one discipline to apply to.
Yeah, and often, you know, taking a look at artist CVs can help answer this question. If your, you know, education and background is stronger in one than the other, that could offer some guidance. Also, you know, what your work samples are, what work samples you have to support the information that's in your CV. Or it, you know, another thing to consider is what you're working on currently and where you want to go in the future with your work.
I have some more questions about kind of timelines and generative artist status. So if I completed a program in 2021 and have been generating and submitting new work, but have yet to successfully be published in literary journals in the past 2 years, would I be considered too early in career to apply?
Anyone want to take
The-
that? Go ahead,
was-
Melissa.
Oh,
Yeah, the work sample, for work sample eligibility, there is a requirement that work is publicly presented in some way. So in literature, that can be, it can be a reading. For example, if you're selected to read your work, even if it's not published in print form or online. So there are different ways that work can be considered publicly presented, but that is a work sample eligibility requirement for at least 2 of your work samples. One can be a work in progress.
Someone is a poet for 10 plus years and is now beginning to write for musicals. So now considers themselves to be a playwright and having works on my musical for the past 2 to 3 years. Would I be eligible?
No, you would not be eligible. We consider an artist's career in terms of early career status holistically. So if you've already been working for 10 years as a poet, we wouldn't reset the clock for you as an early career artist in theater.
And does generative practice include work where an applicant isn't the project lead, but rather played a smaller role in an overall project?
I can try to
For
take
this,
that.
oh, great.
Oh.
Go ahead, Tia.
I think it's hard to say without knowing more specifics about the project and looking at the CV, but I'll just say you need to be a lead generative role. And we do have more information around that for each field specifically as well. So I would turn your attention to the webinar guide. Sorry, not the webinar guide, the fellowship guide, pardon. But we do consider you will need to be submitting works in the work samples that you are the lead generative artist. Is that my understanding on the mark, Eleanor?
I wonder if this question is about when the clock would start in terms of generative practice, and if you are a collaborator, a generative collaborator on a project, does that count toward generative practice? And I would say it does, and I know that there's a lot of ways to slice and dice that collaborative piece. So I would encourage, if that's what the question is focused on, making an appointment and kind of walking through your CV with the program staff.
And I'll just maybe reiterate something about being the generative artist on the work samples that you submit, is that we do specify that if you are applying as an individual artist, you must be the sole and lead generative artist on your work samples, which means that they can't have been equally co-created with other collaborators. Obviously, if there's, if you're a filmmaker and you have a lot of collaborators supporting you, but you are, the filmmaker, that is you being the lead sole generative artist. But you have to be the person who is the author of the work, who has the copyright to the work, for example. These are other ways that we think about it. And that if you are applying collaboratively, that the two people on the application, the two co-applicants, have to be the two co-authors of the work and the only two co-authors of the work.
And so I'll ask a question from the Q&A that's directly tied to that. So to clarify the requirements of the 3 original works, if I'm applying as an individual, as in not as part of a collaborative team, can I submit films that were co-directed?
No.
No.
You have to have your own films that you have directed solely.
So it's okay if you have co-directed films, but
Yeah.
they are not eligible to be submitted as your work sample as an individual artist applicant for this fellowship. Meaning you'll have to have 2 or 3 if you choose to submit the third, or work in progress, where you are the sole lead generative artist, filmmaker in that case.
And when does artist time start? When you have an actual piece of work to show for yourself as an artist? So like if you graduated, but you didn't create a piece of work until a few years later, would that be the start date as your range of 10 years as a generative artist?
I would say, when in looking at your CV, when do we start to see evidence of your work as a generative artist? So some people do graduate and then take time off from a generative practice before they start. And so I guess the real question is, when do you start the clock? When do we start to see you working as an artist? I hope that answers the question.
And when you say any other work for more than 10 years, so this person was a social worker for 15 years and then decided to become a producer in the past 5 years.
Well, this is a bit of a tricky question. Yes, of course, it's we are really focused on your work as an artist. So not considering or evaluating your work in a completely different field. But if you are a producer, like a film producer or a theater producer, we don't specifically support producers. In filmmaking, we're focused on the director. In theater, we're focused on the playwright or the deviser. So we don't support producers directly through this. It has to be, you have to be in a role in which you are actively creating, generating your own original work.
And can you define significant artistic recognition? This person has a few publications in print and online, but no physical exhibitions.
Go ahead.
We do, in terms of recognition that might make you not eligible, we do again have a pretty detailed field-specific list in the fellowship guide. There's also a list of kind of like field-specific amount of work that you may have produced that could also make you not eligible. I'm not sure if this question is about that. I would definitely guide you into that. Starts on page 6 of the fellowship guide, and that might help give some of a barometer to what you're thinking about. So just to give an example, in literature, writers with 3 or more published or under contract to be published works, novels, novellas, memoirs, collections, etc., would be considered to have achieved significant success and wouldn't be eligible to apply, even if they are within the 10 years. But anyone who, has less work out in the world published could be eligible to apply if they meet all of the other criteria.
And to make an appointment with Jerome's staff, if you live in New York City, should you make an appointment with Melissa? Or if you live in Minnesota, make it with TA or Kristen? Or can you make an appointment with anybody?
You can make an appointment with anybody. It is through Calendly, and it'll just give all of our availability, and you get to pick when is best for you to meet.
Can you apply as an individual applicant if the work you generate is often collaborative with a variety of different artists, but you are always leading/directing the project? And can the work samples include such collaborations?
I can speak to this again since I talked about collaborative work before. So again, if you are applying as an individual, you will have to be the sole lead author of the work, meaning that you have conceived and created work from its very initial phases into its presentation. Again, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't have had other collaborators working with you, but it does mean that if you had collaborators who would be considered co-authors, that those work samples would not be eligible. So you do have to apply, even if you are someone that works in a wide range of ways, you work independently and you also work collaboratively. If you're applying to this fellowship as an individual artist, you would have to select work samples that represent work where you're the sole lead author of the work.
Yeah, I'll just say something about that because we've had really unfortunate situations where artists submitted work samples and presented their CV stating themselves as the sole author of work. And then when we do our research at that finalist stage, or in one situation, we had a panelist say, I have seen this work exhibited, and this is a co-authored work. And then when we did the research, we discovered that it was co-authored, co-created, and then that artist was removed from consideration. So it's really important to be clear and honest about that.
And I'll add this on this question to hopefully clarify things further. As collaborators, all of the projects must be made by both of us together, or can we have separate work samples?
Your work samples have to be works that you have co-created. So again, in your artistic life, we know that you might create work independent from each other, but for the purposes of this application, you have to demonstrate a history of working together and an intention to continue working together in the duration of the fellowship. And your work samples do have to all be co-authored by the two of you and only the two of you. So that means you have to have at least 2 to 3 projects where you are the co-authors, where you can submit representations of those projects or bodies of work as your work samples.
Kind of sliding over to the CV, since journalism does not count as an eligible artist type, counting toward my amount of work, should I not include it on my CV? That would be like any journalism articles that were published, or should I still list all the journalism related info on the CV?
You can list it as other artistic experience, or, you know, as you noted, other journalism experience. We don't have a requirement around that specifically, but it's not a problem to share that work.
And for work samples, what does publicly presented constitute for a playwright if we've only had one play produced? So maybe multiple works have been written and completed, but one has been fully produced.
It could be readings. It could be you're allowed to submit a in progress work. It could be informal showings, things like that.
And I'll follow along with it.
It could be sometimes playwrights have their work published in different, like American theater, or through different venues like that.
And this is related. For theater playwright, the application guide states that work sample scripts must be published. I have no scripts that have been published, but several that have been produced are publicly performed, like readings. Is public presentation sufficient, or is, like, quote unquote formal publication required?
And public presentation is sufficient, and I'm not exactly sure where you're finding the information about publication for playwrights, if that's in the application or not, but it should be that it's any kind of public presentation.
I think it should say publicly shared.
Yeah. It should say, that's what it should say. And another thought that I just had about, it could also be commissioned work. Work that you are working with through a theater to have it commissioned. That would also count as, that kind of publicly shared space.
Another question directly related to publicly shared work. Does social media or YouTube count?
I'm going to say no, that wouldn't count, because that goes under the category of self-produced. What do my colleagues say? Did I answer correctly?
Melissa, do you want to take that?
Yeah, although Eleanor, I'm curious if we have more nuance here, but yeah, in general, if you're sharing something on, self-sharing on social media or on YouTube, that wouldn't necessarily apply to publicly shared, but we do know that there's a lot of nuance here, and I think in so many cases, as we've said, if you have questions about the public presentation of your work, we'd encourage you, or the eligibility of your work samples, we encourage you to be in touch with us. But I will hand it over to you, Eleanor, to offer any additional nuance to that response.
I think that what we're looking for here is, because we're supporting a range of artists from 2 to 10 years as an early career artist. And of course, for most artists at the 8 or 9 year mark, you're going to have a lot more work that you've generated than when you're at that 2 year mark. And so the question might be, do I have enough work to qualify that has been publicly shared? And I think we're trying to embrace a lot of the kind of nuances and different ways artists are working. Something that you just post on your website is not going to have as much weight with panelists as something that might have been through a curated online experience, or you know, something that had a competitive selection process or an editorial process to be shared online. So I think, you know, if you have work that has been publicly shared in some way that connects you to the audiences, the viewers, the participants that you are trying to connect with through your work, that is what you want to focus on for work samples.
And would a community theater production count as publicly shared, or is it only professional theaters?
Say that again, Andrea, I missed. A community.
Does a
Yes.
community theater production count as publicly shared, or is it only professional theaters?
No, community theater, we don't differentiate between community versus professional. Community counts, and sometimes people, that's the goal of their work, is to connect with a specific community, and they're not, you know, it's not a goal to be presented by a large, you know, regional theater, or, you know, to have your work presented in, you know, on Netflix, or, you know, some larger avenue. So we really want to work with the intentionality with which artists are working and who they define as the people they're trying to reach and connect with through their work.
And a work sample requirement question: does a work in progress sample have to have been publicly presented?
No.
This is from a visual artist. If I had a huge shift in the aesthetics of my visual and sculptural works in the past 7 years, would it weaken my application to include both bodies of work that aren't cohesive visually, even as they are conceptually? Would you suggest I show only a more visually cohesive body of work in the work samples?
I think I can start us off with this answer. We recommend that you present, you know, your strongest work in your work samples first and foremost. And if you believe that that spans, you know, both of these periods or bodies of work, we definitely welcome you to do so. There isn't a mandate around cohesiveness, visual cohesiveness, for example. So it's really just about you showing the work that you have been making. You might also connect to the work that you want to be making as another way to think about what you might want to represent in your work samples. Again, keeping in mind that 2 of your work samples must be work or bodies of work that are completed, publicly presented. Well, a third can be a work in progress, which again is an opportunity, of course, to demonstrate the work that you're working on now. And I'll also add that we provide a lot of room for work sample context and description. And these are opportunities for you to share the trajectory of your work with panelists. And so certainly taking advantage of these description and context areas will give you an opportunity to shed more light, especially on those kind of visual or aesthetic transitions that may be taking place or that they might be seeing. It demonstrates that you are aware that this is a shift that happened in your practice.
And I'll just note that we are at our last, we have 2 more questions to go. So if you have questions burning in your pocket, now's a good time to ask. So this one is near and dear to me and Felix. If I am submitting my application right before the deadline and there's a power outage leading to my app being 2 minutes late, or one of my work samples not successfully uploading, can I get a grace period? And so I'll just take this time to emphasize that, you know, 4 p.m. on the deadline day doesn't mean kind of wait until 3:59. It's kind of easier on you, hopefully, and everybody else if you kind of, plan to wrap things up well before then, just so you don't have that, what if something bad happens moment. That being said, if there is an error with, let's say you provide a link to a video on Vimeo and you provide a password, and we find out later when we're doing our eligibility checking, like, oh, that password no longer works, we're not going to disregard your entire application because, there might be a typo in your password. We'll reach out to you and we'll work to fix that. But that all is to say, ideally, you don't put yourself in a position where there could be that last minute hiccup. But we'll be reasonable in kind of how we address any application errors with you.
I'll just plug on the password note, since you mentioned it, Andrea, if you can make your passwords not expire, if you are submitting links that do have passwords, that is ideal, since this is a several month process. And of course that has happened in the past.
A question here is, some of our film projects are in Spanish. Do they have to be with English subtitles?
If that is an option, that would be helpful for the breadth of reviewers. If that isn't possible, I think connect with us and we will work with you on a way to make it accessible for all of the reviewers.
And this is at the moment, our final question. I want to submit a memoir in progress. If I've not shared it before, what can I submit for my publicly shared work?
You can submit one work in progress. So that would be what you could submit that memoir in progress for that, but you would need 2 additional work samples. You need a total of 3 work samples to apply. And so you would need 2 publicly shared work samples beyond that work in progress memoir.
And I'll just specify further, that could be short stories, it could be essays, short stories, in the memoir genre, or in related, creative writing genres that have been publicly shared in any way, online, in print, read aloud at an event, etc.
And this is related to the core questions. Do you prioritize video answers to the questions versus the written responses? And I can say that statistically speaking, so we've offered this option for the last couple of rounds, and there has been no real meaningful difference between like who advances to a finalist stage and who eventually gets a fellowship. The percentages of folks who have been submitting their responses by text or video have kind of, stayed consistent throughout. So to me, that would say that there isn't a panel preference for one medium over the other. At the same time, I would say that panelists, uniformly respond to kind of authenticity and feeling like they're getting to know you as an artist. And so some artists might feel like that can come across better in written form. And for some artists, they feel like that comes across for them better in video form. So that's kind of a question for you to decide for yourself. But, in terms of preference for us overall, I would say it's neutral. If anybody else has something to share on that.
No.
And I'm going to say it, and we'll see if it's true. That was our final question. This is usually when another question comes in, but I do believe that was actually our final question for this session. So just a reminder to folks, if you go to the events page on our website, which I'll drop into the chat here, There's information on all the upcoming events, which includes a session next week on the application. And we'll have some on-demand sessions about the CV and work samples. And then later on in the process, those live Q&A sessions you can come in and drop in. Otherwise, in the meantime, be in touch, make your phone appointments if that makes sense, or send your questions via email.
And thank you all for your time and consideration, and we wish you the best with your application process.
Thanks all.
Bye.